Hello, and welcome to episode 15, of 5 Reasons Not to Harm Your Loved Ones During Quarantine. Today I'm going to start a little bit differently. I'd like you to listen for a minute. I'm going to read this and try to just position my phone at the same time. Imagine sitting in a crowded jail cell for days, weeks, even years, waiting for your day in court. Not yet convicted of any crime, unable to make bail. Now imagine yourself there amid the spread of COVID-19, unable to wash your hands, unable to social distance yourself from dozens of other inmates, and the entire time you're incarcerated. You have little access or no access to quality health care, and that's the grim reality of hundreds of thousands of people across the United States right now. Today, a judge's decision to set bail is the equivalent of a death sentence in some cases, with COVID-19 rapidly spreading. We often think that everyone who's in jail deserves to be there. And in our current situation, I thought it was important to distinguish between people who are in jail because they can't make their bail or their bond versus people who are in jail or prison serving a sentence. All the people who are in the former situation are presumed innocent. And because of that, they are not convicted of any crime. They're awaiting their day in court. Because of the closure of the courts and the limited access to the courts, this is obviously a situation that was never intended and a situation that's forcing attorneys to go before judges with facts unrelated to the crime that have to do with current family financial situations, alternative to incarceration alternatives that will protect the community and guarantee that the person will appear in court when scheduled to do so, and various other things that are required when you are a defendant in a criminal case. Those that are sentenced, they are, as we talked about yesterday, under 1 year, they're in county jail. Over 1 year, they are a guest of the Michigan Department of Corrections and in a prison facility somewhere in Michigan, not necessarily where they live. Further strife that this causes is you have these inmates, whether they're temporarily there or there for a sentence, who have had minimal contact with loved ones by the mere fact that they're incarcerated. And now it's even more limited. So when we talk about people being released from jail or released from prison, you want them to have some support in the community to when they're released. Family or friends or a job or whatever it is those are factors that lower recidivism and guarantee a continued safe society. So no one's really looked at the circumstances of people who do not get out on an early release situation or out on bond and lose their loved ones or disconnect from their loved ones because of the restrictions, and perhaps are alienated from their loved ones. And being that they're kind of in, a cesspool of germs, being incarcerated or imprisoned in the first place, if they are released, they can't immediately just come home to their families. So where are they going? What are we doing? So this is kind of a collateral issue that I've been thinking about that I'm not sure that a lot of people are thinking about. So, I just wanted to kind of bring that up. But what I really wanted to focus on today is the impact that this is having on our kids, and talk about it a little bit from the legal standpoint, but really let's talk about it from the human standpoint. And yes, lawyers can be human. But I think that it's important for us to remember that they get their vibe from us. So if we're freaking out, if we have worries, if we have anxiety, they know that we as adults feel that way. They may not understand the scope, or that, we're not worried necessarily about dying, but we're worried about that, like, they're not having a graduation, or they don't get to be with their friends, or that they, missed spring break. That we're worried about if our businesses are still going to be in business. They just see a very worried, anxious person who they're used to being their rock. So it's really, really important for us to, as adults, contain our anxiety, because our kids feel it and may not understand it, which is, if your kids are anything like mine, they're not going to tell me they don't understand it. They're not going to tell me that, they have questions, or they're scared, or that they fear anything. They're just going to go on with their day and think that if they just do what they're supposed to do, and, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, that, we don't have to face it and it will all be fine. And there's been several people in the mental health community who have looked at this, and they, basically want, their words were that this is an unprecedented social experiment, and that we need to remember that kids staying home, not having sports or school or extracurricular activities, not having their music lessons, and not being in person, hanging out, and all the other things that they do, really, this can be a mental health situation of the future. And really the reason is, and it's the most hardly hit with teenagers, or like I'll call it late childhood, adolescence, because that's the time when they're learning about social interaction and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and kind of their first situations where they have to figure out on their own, and how to act, how to behave, be discriminating, in that, that person's not nice, that person is nice, that's someone who has the characteristics I want in my friends. So they're kind of at that age where they're just really experimenting and learning about how to interact in social groups, contrary to, when they're in first grade and you invite the whole class to the birthday party and the moms stay there and say, stand behind them and say, please, say thank you, share that toy. This is their first interaction time, and they're missing out on that. And that is something that, as I said, the psychological community and the mental health community are really looking at as something that we should be paying attention to. Also, obviously, kids who wake up in the morning, like my kids, my son, as he's still in high school, his normal day would be to wake up at, 6:50 and be sitting in his classroom at 7:10 a.m. and then, get out of school at 2:20. He'd, go to sports. He'd go to do his radio show. He'd eat. He'd go do homework. And it was very the same every day. And so now these young people are also, they have a new what I do every day, and it's not the same every day. It also doesn't require them to be as alert and on it every day as they have to when they're in a brick and mortar school. So it's really challenging, and I'm really interested to what any of you have to say about how you're keeping teenagers, adolescents, anyone older than like second grade, what are you doing with them? How are you engaging them in, family activities and stimulating their brain and not making them completely turn into vidiots, which that is the connection to their friends. So I'm not criticizing that at all. I know that my son, he plays this live PS4 thing, and I don't know, there's a lot of different boy voices that sound like they're in my other room, and I'm glad that they at least can do that together for a couple hours in the evening. But we just need to be aware and alert about that. They don't really know, even college students, they don't really know, adults don't know what the real story is. So we need to also be cognizant of that there is fake news out there, a lot of it. I think as adults, we're probably better at figuring out what's fake and what's real, but our kids don't have that experience. And now they're in a situation where they need to kind of be able to do that. But obviously, they don't know how to do that. The other thing is that not only do kids see a lack of structure or routine or different structure or routine, because there's so many people at home at one time, if there's any instability in the home, that always increases the risk to children. And when you increase the risk of children, especially children who have been abused or have been in less than perfectly safe situations, by not going to school and not leaving the house, they've lost access to their safe person, whether that's a safe person who helped them when they were in school and just had a lot of anxiety, or if they're at home and feeling unsafe. And so we need to just, like I said, let's pay attention to our kids. Let's make sure that we're checking in with them every day. It's really important to just understand this dynamic of social distancing and how traumatizing that can be. And the research says over and over again, kids are extremely resilient, and we know they are because kids who are removed from their parents and in foster care and then return home, they're good. There's kids who are severely harmed by their parents, and with appropriate interventions, they bounce back and they can have successful relationships later. So let's keep all of that in mind. And now I'm going to kind of turn a little bit to education. And this, again, as I said, today is going to be all about the kids, especially in lower socioeconomic areas where they don't have as much access either to technology, to the internet. I mean, at this point, the internet is almost free to everyone, or free to almost everyone, I guess I should say. But these places, especially, and everywhere else, we know in the summer, the research tells us that kids will lose some of the information or knowledge that if they had been tested at the end of the school year. When in September, there's a loss, a percentage that, varies from place to place, and lots of other factors. So is that happening now? Is that going to be the negative effect of online learning? And so I think that in a general ed situation, we know what that is, and we've seen statistically and through research what that looks like. So we need to be reinforcing and enhancing, and enriching, even though the district is providing online school. There is a huge divergent, line of what some schools are providing versus other schools are providing. I have a niece who's doing, 7 hours of homework a day. My son is doing like 15 minutes. So that's really important to enrich and enhance, to try to fill up the day and plan those activities with your student. There's a ton of virtual field trips. There's a ton of different experiences. You can go to, if they're studying the Civil War in history, you can go on a virtual field trip to the Civil War Museum as an enrichment. And these are just really great things that you can schedule into your child's day. For special ed students, I think it's even more important to do the supplementing and the enhancing and the enriching. And again, I kind of sound like a broken record on this point, but if you haven't done it, you must contact your child's school. You must have that IEP rewritten. You must include a plan for distance learning. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how they were possibly going to measure the goals of the existing IEP in a distance learning situation. This is potentially a ginormous violation of the IDEA and your child's rights. And the underlying principles of the IDEA to even the playing field are frustrated if the parent is not making the demands. Everyone who I work with who does educational evaluations and behavioral assessments and all of the speech and language testing, whatever it is that needs to be done. They're all working virtually right now. They have adapted, they're open. And so that's not an excuse for any educational entity to use. And so I think that is something to really, I can't tell you how important it is. In special ed, there's basically 2 golden rules. If you don't ask for it, you don't get it. And if you don't write it down, it never happened. And both of them are, shining brightly on the marquee right now. Other things, I didn't give you any statistics yet. And I love my statistics. As of today, there have been 1,768 deaths from COVID-19 in Michigan, and 27,001 cases of COVID-19 in Michigan. And, I put together like these little outlines before each day and, spend quite a bit of time preparing. And I happened to find one of these sheets from last Thursday, so not even a week ago. And from last Thursday until today, we have increased over 2,000 cases in Michigan. So, we've talked a lot about each day, about which statistics to trust and which statistics, oops, sorry, I tipped you over, and which statistics not to, but I do get them from the same source every day, fact-checked, and so I think that is a pretty stunning number. So we need to continue to be safe and stay home, and that's really important. The only other thing about kids that I wanted to mention today is last night, the director of DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, which is the umbrella organization over protective services, foster care, as well as like WIC and some of the other children's services and help for those that are challenged financially to support their families. And she talked about how, and it was refreshing. It was what parents needed to hear. But she talked about how it really is their goal to reunite kids with their parents, and a lot about the exception to the mandatory not in-person parenting time between parents and kids in foster care. And she talked about the frustration and the interruption in the reunification process. And as I said, it was refreshing and glad that she recognizes that that's happening. However, she indicated that, there is in the new stay-at-home order, there is a provision that allows us to ask for that in-person visitation to continue if there is extreme mental distress to the child. Of course, mental distress is not defined, and it would look different for every age child. It doesn't say how you prove it or what it is or, what we're looking at. And you write a letter to the director of DHHS to see if you and your family fit in this exception. But she didn't say that one has ever been granted, how long the turnaround time is, or any of what I would have wanted to hear. Being that this was a session put together for parents whose kids were in foster care, and I was just kind of an eavesdropper, even though they knew I was on the line. I certainly did not want to come up with questions that I could ask in private and get my answer to, and kind of be that person. So that did happen last night. And, we have a couple cases that we're going to be writing those letters to her about. So stay tuned. We have not heard very much about juvenile detention. I know that there has been some cases in Wayne County of people who work in juvenile detention. They haven't reported on the kids who are in juvenile detention, and I think that's because no one's been tested. I don't think it has to do with it not being there. I think it's just not where they're testing. As I mentioned earlier, kids are at risk. They're just not as much at risk as adults. So certainly they need to be practicing social distancing and following the rules as well. And so, with that, I think that we'll wrap up for today. We will continue tomorrow at 1. I hope to see you all there. And on Friday, we'll be having Carly will be doing the show. And I think she's going to talk a little bit more about estate planning and some family law topics. So stay safe, stay home, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.